Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain?
Hi everyone, so this is a new trial, something exciting over here. It's actually in response to quite a bit of feedback I've been receiving over the years. I often get emails from many of you, or messages just asking to comment on certain pieces that are popular online. And these are the ones that come in that seem to be the most popular in terms of critiques of religion. So we'll be looking at a number of them. Now I want to start by saying the following. I often see on social media, it's like quite vicious or not nice the way people talk about each other's views, because these are very emotive and deeply personal. I'm going to try not to do that. I mean, a lot of these cases are made to be impactful by people who really genuinely care about what they're saying. And I think there's a lot of points that really need to be addressed. But I think what I want to try and do is look at the video together and analyze and see what a Jewish response might be, or what I personally think about it. And that's what we're going to do. The first video that I've been sent a lot, that's very popular, is by Stephen Fry, who's a famous author and comedian and writer, but also very, very strong and well-spoken, intelligent, and has a very powerful piece from an interview where he attacks God as, you know, basically why do bad things happen to good people, but in a very emotive and punchy and very powerful form. So I'm going to take a look at that and talk about it.
Suppose what Oscar believed in as he died, in spite of your protestations, suppose it's all true, and you walk up to the pearly gates and you are confronted by God. What will Stephen Fry say to him, her, or it?
I will basically, what's known as theodicy, I think. I'll say bone cancer in children? What's that about? How dare you? How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? It's not right. It's utterly.
Okay, so he's going straight into the why do bad things happen? How could God exist and allow this to happen? Bone cancer in children. I'll make a point which I think is really important, because we're going to see this as he develops this. Two things that are very, very common, very important. One is, obviously, if you turned up there wouldn't be pearly gates. There's no physical reality, assuming monotheism, standard monotheistic thinking is correct. So what happens, of course, is that we would suddenly wake up from what effectively might be thought of as some kind of virtual reality world that we're in, and be in a world of the mind or soul, not of the body. That's like a relatively standard understanding. If you need a source for it, Maimonides speaks about this in chapter 8 of the Laws of Repentance and other places. But generally speaking, we're in a world that is not the physical reality we'd be in, obviously, and we'd be face to face with the idea of God, and not a human being who's hurting people, but an infinite creator thinking the universe into existence. So the first thing we'd realize is we don't actually have a right to exist. But the second thing we'd do is we'd suddenly get a glimpse at the mind of the infinite creator and see the whole of reality from a totally different perspective. You know, as we kind of enter and leave this world, and see how little pieces contribute here and there. Each of our lives plays some role in the big tapestry of existence. I suspect that the whole perspective would look very, very different. But let's go on and see how he develops this point, because I think he does make a very important point which I want to come to and talk about.
It's utterly, utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain?
Right, so of course, the root of all of this is this evil, injustice, capricious. You know, you think of as if a human was doing this with human limited capabilities, where death was really final and yet had the power to make everything different, this would be evil, right? It'd be murdering people. I mean, the real issue is not, by the way, if that's true, is not children. The real issue is death itself. I mean, if there was a God out there, you know, creates this universe, who then every being kills them, that would be pretty, by our standards, pretty evil, capricious, and everything else. Obviously, there is a real contradiction between the idea of a loving God creating the world and finality of existence being the fate of everybody, which is why people who believe finality is the fate of everybody believe there's no God, and people who believe there's a God who's loving creating the world believe finality is not the end, right? But you can't start attacking the idea of God on the basis that death is the end, right? That's a mistake. But those who believe in that God obviously believe death is not the end. And therefore, it's just simply transitioning us from one realm to another. But from our perspective inside is brutal and horrible and awful. But when we get outside, we're like, oh, okay, we're now here. things are different. So I think that's important. But again, notice the power. And I think the beautiful thing about what he's doing, by the way, and I actually really like this, is you can't, and it's amazing when you look at the interview as he's about to talk about the next bit, is you can't not be shaken by what he's saying. And I think it's really important that we are shaken by what he's saying. And I want to explain why. But let's take a look at it a little bit further.
Now, if I died and it was Pluto, Hades, and if it was the 12 Greek gods, then I would have more truck with it, because the Greeks they didn't pretend not to be human in their appetites and in their capriciousness and in their unreasonableness. They didn't present themselves as being all-seeing, all-wise, all-kind, all-beneficent. Because the God who created this universe, if it was created by God, is quite clearly a maniac, utter maniac, totally selfish. We have to spend our life on our knees thanking him?
Okay, so now this is a slightly different argument. And the first point, which I think is really important, is he's saying, the Greek gods, he could understand this world looks like a human's playing with it, but this God that talked about in monotheistic religion, infinite, loving, all-caring, all-knowing, all-powerful, that's not the world that God would build. The deep point is this, is that although he's making that philosophical distinction between a human-type God, I could get it, but that, at the end, I think it's still a huge projection of self onto God. I imagine the scene, somebody turns up in the afterlife, and I once was explaining this to somebody, and they said, well, what do you think happens when he gets there? And I don't know. I try and study the source and understand as best I can what the teachings and the wisdom say. But I imagine you standing there face to face to the infinite God, and you suddenly see all this. And in a moment, you see all these souls that left that you were crying over, and you see they don't have any particular problem with it. They've now, everyone just realized, okay, we were in a very real, I don't mean virtual reality game like Trivial. We were in this, we did our bit. I see how my bit played a role. I see even a short-lived 6-month stint or 3 days of a life or longer life or shorter life, or how it all is playing in this incredible world that we're going to come back into again in Jewish and other beliefs, and it's going to achieve some kind of incredible perfection. I see it now. And then I suddenly feel this almost shame of, how was I so angry against you, God? I was actually angry maybe against, I think we do this, again, I don't know anything about Stephen Fry's own life, but very often people that go through tough things in this world, or again, I don't know about his example, but let's say we're beaten or abused by people in this world, especially if they're religious figures, or otherwise we're shamed or humiliated. It's like that anger we feel against them, they become God. To a child, the adult world is God, and there's this mean, evil, terrible God who creates all this stuff in the world. Again, I don't know if I don't know enough of it. I'm not going to try and project anything particularly onto Stephen Fry, but I'm just giving that kind of notion. I imagine you turn up in that world, and I guess for the first moment there's a bit of, oh my goodness, how could I say that? And I always imagine that God would turn around and say, no, don't worry. I understand you went through that hurt and that pain, and that's where you're coming from. But actually what you were doing was something good, because what you were doing was shattering 2 things. Number 1, the delusion that this world is okay, that too many of us live under. We're happy, we're so much to be grateful for, and we should always be happy and grateful. But can we not feel the pain and suffering of this world? Can we not cry? Whatever it is monotheistically that we do believe is whatever it is that's caused all this evil to be in the world, our job in this world is to rectify it, is to scream at the pain of the world, is to shout that it's unjust. If God's giving us this opportunity to perfect the world, fine, but let's not accept the world the way it is. Number 2 is the childish images of God, of these superhumans in the sky, perhaps more powerful than the Greek ones and more benevolent than the Greek. It needs to be shattered and ripped away. We can't have humanized. We're not talking about parents that we're happy with or angry with when we talk about the infinite creator of the universe. Those gods need to be gone from our thinking, right? If that's all they were, was superhumans, then there would be serious problems with the world. So I think these 2 issues, right? We look at the world, and this is not the way things are meant to be, charges us with, okay, so then our job is to scream and cry and feel the pain of the world and want to do something about it. So in that sense, I almost feel that the critics like this are doing the world such a great favor. I know when they get it with F, God might say thank you. Thank you for shattering that kind of naivety of the world. Thank you for tearing away from people their superhumanized abstraction of God. Thank you for taking away from people the comfort that this world really, that we kind of think of it, this is the best that God could do kind of thing. And forcing people into that deep sense of pain and that deep sense of outrage and that deep sense of we're in this world to change the world. I want to just listen to the end, though.
Yes, the world is very splendid, but it also has in it insects whose whole life cycle is to burrow into the eyes of children and make them blind. Why did you do that to us? You could easily have made a creation in which that didn't exist. So, you know, atheism is not just about not believing there's a God, but on the assumption that there is one. What kind of God is he? It's perfectly apparent that he is monstrous.
Okay, but the particular example aside, which may be a particular exaggeration, which again is designed to emote this emotional overload, I think is exactly the point that we need to think of, is that we're in this world to create the day when it's the Garden of Eden again. We're in this world to create the day when there is no more death, there is no more suffering, there is no more evil. That's the human charge in the world. In the interim, what I said I think is certainly the standard monotheistic view. Again, there may be reasons to doubt it altogether, just reject the whole thing. But if someone is going to challenge the belief in God that is standard in monotheistic religion, they have to see it as the belief in an infinite loving creator for whom this phase of reality is something we enter, interact with and leave. Possibly will come back into at its end. And that's the model you want to attack. This will not form a deep attack on it, but it should form a disturbing sense of, this is, you know, if God did create this world and did put us in it for some reason, it's clearly not to leave the world as we found it. It's clearly to advance it. And that advances can be through science and through medicine and through things like that, but also through the values that make us want to dedicate, whether it's our charity to these things or bringing the world into a better place or doing whatever it is, so that our contributions will be the day when all the lives that enter this world can look back and say, together we transformed this world. That God and us are partners in building the beautiful world. I just want to go back though to the particular characterization of God, which again, as I said a few times, I think is just a projection of what we think about humans, but also this idea of what an egomaniac wants to pray to him. You know, if God's an infinite being, God's in need of our prayers, right? Obviously, every part of this world is about our development. And let's not forget that it wasn't that far away in the past that humans would not have thought different types of human suffering was such a bad thing. There was a huge amount of tribalism where our tribe counts, where it wouldn't have bothered us that somebody on the other side of the world is suffering. And that is something which, whether one believes in monotheism or not, monotheism gave the world, right? Or, you know, again, I'm not dealing with a truth question here, but just to realize that the belief in a single creator changed the world in a radical way, because it offered the possibility that creator cares about the whole world. And the universalization of value is arguably at least something that monotheism gave to the world, and the idea of one God gave to the world. So let's just take a look at the final line here.
Utterly monstrous and deserves no respect whatsoever. The moment you banish him, your life becomes simpler, purer, cleaner, more worth living, in my opinion.
That sure is the longest answer to that question that I ever got in this entire series.
Okay, so the idea of banishing this God, I might agree with, in the sense that if it is this superhuman God who just couldn't be bothered to create a better world, or lets everyone just die and suffer, I think, yes, let's banish that. That much we can totally agree with. But the actual idea of the God who loves the universe, the God who charges each of us to come in and bring this universe to perfection, is one of the most important teachings that monotheistic religion gave to the world, whether a person believes in it or not. The fact that we care and feel outrage for humans on the other side of the world is partly empathy, but it's partly that you know, ancient worlds thought in very deeply tribal ways, as far as we can tell, to care about every human and dedicating our lives in whatever way we can to make the world a better place, so that suffering will leave us one day, so that we become partners with what those religions taught is God's vision of the world. I think is something we shouldn't banish, something we need to cherish and live with. So obviously the question of people going through tough stuff, again, from that perspective that we look at, clearly we're not going to have the perspective to understand an infinite being's view of reality. I mean, that's obvious, right? You know, we see a tiny slither of things. It's a bit like when children can't understand what parents are doing to them when they take them for an operation or stop them crossing a road to chase a football. These are just things that kids emotionally see as terrible and adults see as differently. And obviously, our little perspective on history, we're not going to understand why these things are happening to us necessarily. That's obviously going to be we don't see the afterlife. We don't see much of history. We see a tiny few decades and a tiny perspective on it. So the notion that we would understand it is obviously we're not going to. But that doesn't mean that monotheistic sources think that we're supposed to live in this world of bliss. No, I mean, take the Torah, which I'm familiar with, is full of the idea there's going to be terrible things and so on happening. It's not the the malice of God per se. It's the imperfected, broken world that humans are supposed to be responsible for fixing. By way of conclusion, I want to again say I feel always uncomfortable doing critique videos. This is obviously a strongly made point by somebody who feels like it is in some degree of anger or pain about it, but a very well made point, and I think something we should really learn from. But in terms of, as I've said to many people, in terms of is the fact that people go through a difficult time, or really difficult time, or really difficult, incredibly painful time in this world, is that a contradiction to the loving infinite creator who puts them into situations, brings them the other side, moves history around? You know, there's a doctrine that many believe in, including in a lot of Jewish sources, for example, of reincarnation. People may come in again and out. In other words, we're dealing, if we do believe in an infinite loving God, we believe that the world is obviously a small part of something much, much, much greater. And that's always been a held belief. That's not a modern idea. That's a deep belief. But in this world, we are meant to cry with the world, feel the pain of the world, feel that suffering should not be the case, and dedicate our lives so that in some way, when we've left this world, it will be closer to the perfection that it's meant to have than it was when we came in.